Disclaimer: this video is of humorous nature only. The author does not seek to insult or humiliate anyone. The video may contain profanity. People under the age of 16 should refrain from watching this video. Story 1. My mom calling me. I was in my mid-20s to tell me that she was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer, never smoked in her life, and crying like a child saying how scared she was. She speaks English as a second language, so she had to have someone explain to her what her diagnosis meant. She had survived genocide, an abusive husband, and was finally in a place where she was able to enjoy life. I quit the new job that I had started less than a month ago to fly back and forth to her state every 2 weeks to take care of her and stay in hospitals with her, when she had to stay for a few days at a time. I would crawl into her hospital bed whenever I could to cuddle her. I did have siblings who lived near her, but they couldn't do this due to having their own families that they needed to support. I did this routine for 6 months and had to decide to put her in hospice care when her first round of chemo knocked her out, energy-wise, and the doctor said there wasn't any hope left. Due to the language barrier, she didn't understand what hospice was, and for the first few days, we stayed in her room, gave her meds to keep her comfortable, ate a lot of ice cream, and watched comedies on my iPad. Around day 5, she went to sleep and never woke up again. In the middle of the night on day 7, the death rattle, one of the most horrible sounds you could ever hear, came, and I told the nurses. Then I held her hand while I said my goodbyes and told her how good of a mother she was and how much I loved her. She was and still is the only person who could comfort me in the way that I needed. I spiraled into years of a very deep depression and have never been the same person since then. Edit. Thank you so much to everyone who offered kind words of support and shared their own stories. It helped me feel less alone because I don't know anyone else besides my siblings. Although nice, our culture is not encouraging of expressing feelings of vulnerability, who have lost their mom or equivalent. Our moms and loved ones that we lost would have wanted us to go on to live full, happy lives, and I hope we all can try our best to do that to honor their lives and love for us. Story 2. My coworker's friend found out she was pregnant just before her husband tragically died in a car accident. A few weeks after giving birth, she accidentally smothered her baby while breastfeeding. My coworker came to work devastated, unable to talk to customers, just crying in her office. It made me see how small my problems really are. Story 3. My aunt dying when I was in 7th grade. She was mentally handicapped, disabled, and lived in a group home near my grandmother's house once my grandmother got too old to care for her as well as she'd like. She was still very involved in her life, just needed some extra help to make sure she had all the proper care she needed. She was the sweetest lady in the world and used to get real excited when my brother and I would visit. She'd take us into her room and show us all the dolls and purses she loved to collect. Always gave us lots of hugs and kisses, played with us, and was just overall a great person to call family. One day, my aunt started complaining about her stomach hurting. My grandmother took her to a doctor who checked her out and sent her home, blaming it on her mental disability. A couple of weeks later, her stomach acid ate through her stomach lining and she died. It was very shocking and absolutely destroyed my mom and grandmother. Her funeral was the first funeral I'd ever been to. It was an open casket. I remember just standing there, staring at her. I wasn't crying or anything. I was upset and a little disturbed by the uncanny valley-ness of her appearance in the casket, but otherwise holding it together pretty well. Suddenly one of her friends from the group home, another mentally handicapped guy, came over and stood next to me. He could probably see on my face that I was upset, so he reached out and just held my hand. Never said a word. I looked up at him and saw his face while he stared at my aunt as well. He looked so confused and heartbroken. That was when I started to cry. I was moved by his kindness, seeing a young kid like me standing there looking lost and coming over to comfort me, while he himself was feeling the exact same things I was. I just stood there for a while, quietly crying, holding this stranger's hand while we both stared at my aunt who should not have died. She had a lot of close friends in that home, and everyone was so sad to see her end up that way. Seeing my father cry while giving her eulogy was really hard on me too. Story 4. Waking up and finding my dog dead after 11 years of love and companionship. She just had surgery 3 days prior to remove a mass that could rupture, and we decided to go for the surgery, because even if it was cancer, we could at least have a timeline. We brought her home on a Wednesday 2 days after surgery, and I was able to see the life come back into her face. I was able to grab a photo with her. She got home, and we eventually went to bed. She slept on the bed we bought her, and my mattress was on the floor at the time. I remember hearing her wake up in the middle of the night, and I was awake too because I was hot, so I used my phone to turn the AC on. I heard her lay back down and heard a sigh. I may have heard my baby's last breath. The next morning, I took a work meeting on my phone while laying in bed. After the meeting, I rolled over to see her laying there with no rise to her chest. I yelled for her once, twice. I jumped out of bed and she was cold to the touch. I lost it. This is first time I'm posting about it on a social platform in this detail. She's been gone now just over a year, and I miss her every day. The kicker was that in 99% of the cases, it's always cancer. We found out 2 days later it was not cancer. I feel like I was robbed. I feel guilty that I laid in bed and had my meeting while she just laid there lifeless. We have her ashes and a paw print to remember her by. I was ruined for weeks. I couldn't even sleep in the bedroom. I still freak out with my other dogs, where if I don't see their chest rise, I yell their name. They do wake up, though. My wife told at the time that I changed, but I'm now getting back to my old self. She was a daddy's girl. There are still days where it hurts to even get out of bed. I thankfully have my wife to lean on and my other 2 dogs. If you read this, thanks for coming along for the ride. I genuinely didn't anticipate ranting about this, but my thumbs just started typing. I guess I had to get it out at some point. Story 6. About 9 years ago, I was around 21-22. I came home from vacation with one of my best friends and went to see my dad. He was acting weird, and it turned out his ex-girlfriend had taken their son, my brother, 17-year age gap between us, from daycare, without telling my dad. He showed up and my brother wasn't there. At this point, he hadn't seen my brother in a week. Him and the ex had broken up a short time before. My dad had been my brother's primary caretaker for his entire life. He was 3 or 4 when they split. His mom and I had been close at one point, but she'd always kind of been a deadbeat. My dad is an extremely unemotional person, but it was obvious he was devastated by this, understandably. I was furious. He told me his ex was going to let us go get my brother for 45 minutes. It was a 20-ish minute drive to where she was living. We brought my brother home, and he was Velcroed to my dad, hugging him while my dad sat in his recliner. When it was time to take him back, we got him in the truck and he was really quiet. All of a sudden, a tiny voice in the back seat asked if we were taking him back. My dad said yes. My brother said, "But Dad, I miss you." I absolutely ducking lost it. I managed to not sob out loud, but I still sobbed. I've been through some crap in my life, but that stands as one of the most tragic moments of my life. Hearing my baby brother, in his sad little voice, say that to my dad. He was heartbroken, we all were. In that moment, I lost all affection for his mom. My dad is not perfect, he will be the first to admit, but he is a good dad, and the way his ex handled all of that was horrible. My dad now has 50-50 custody of my brother, who has continued to be a great kid. He's 14 now. My dad is still his favorite. Moral of the story: don't be an asshole. Story 7. The day I almost got choked, beaten to death, I survived, but have been mentally disturbed since. Every single part of that night is ingrained into my brain in picture-perfect imagery and detail. It haunts me both night and day, awake or asleep. And an even sadder day was his sentencing and my victim impact statement. While I was giving it and mentioned how terrible and disgusting my assaulter was, his parents started screaming at me while he gave me one of the scariest cold dead stares I have ever had to see. It looked like he wanted to kill me again. Make it happen for good. I will never forget how badly I broke down once I walked out of the courtroom and began crying outside about how I hope his family and him all die. An excruciating death and how disgusting they are. A police officer had to snap me out of it and pull me away from the room because I completely fully lost my crap in that moment. And if it wasn't for him pulling me away, I would have probably busted back into that courtroom and taken matters into my own hands. He didn't get any jail time or nothing, just a simple few-month probation. Getting to be in the comfort of his home after trying to beat and choke a girl to death. Both of those days sit deep in my head and genuinely make me so sick and ill every time I have to remember that happened to me. The screams of the girl who I was with, it was her ex-boyfriend who tried to murder me when he stalked her and found us together at night in a parking lot, are also forever playing on loop in my head. I also can't look at striped, colorful shirts, you out feeling violently uncomfortable and sick, thinking about how he ripped mine off of my body, and it hanging off of me afterwards with blood all over it. That will forever be the saddest day of my life, because I really thought it was my last day here on Earth, and feel like a part of me has died since then. Story 8. There's been a few key things that stand out to me. My mom was unexpectedly rushed to the ER when I was 18. I showed up soon after I heard. I get to the room, and they tell me she's not stable enough to be transported to a larger hospital with the resources and tools to perform open-heart surgery. They said they'd keep her alive for as long as we needed. My father needed to be there to give consent to stop. My father was a bad opioid addict. My sister-in-law had to go pick him up from the house, as he's so ducked up he can barely stand or speak. He stumbled into the room, not processing what was happening, and just told them to stop. So watched my mother die as my dad couldn't care less or even understand what was happening. Close second to that is her funeral I spent at babysitting my dad who was high on opiates. Those were hard days, really hard days. I had a cat escape and get knocked up, gave birth to 3 little kittens. One of which was a runt and wasn't thriving like the others. I decided to supplement with little N formula from a bottle. And I don't know if I gave her too much and it got into her lungs, but she went downhill fast and I had to take her to be put down. I cried hysterically for a few days. I thought it was all my fault, and I killed this kitten. My dad ended up getting sober when I was in my mid-20s, and I had the chance to have a relationship with him. He began to be ill, and I watched him slowly give up. He called me one day and said that he did some research and gave it a lot of thought and came to the decision to go into hospice care. I knew that was the beginning of the end for him, and it was less than a month later he died. That conversation was the most honest he's ever been with me. And as sad as it was, I'm grateful for that conversation. Story 9. After a tragic traffic accident where my GF's dad died while she was out of the country, he was her best friend, the one she loved the most. She completely changed for bad. She got extremely depressed. She isolated completely from the world at her room. No visits from friends, no visits from me. She didn't even want to spend time with her family. After a month of isolation, she went back. But she went back just to break up and tell me she loved me the most. But she had to tell me goodbye, and that please I didn't try to follow her. Never again I knew from her after some months, when her best friend, who since her departure had been really close to me, told me that she hadn't just dumped me, but all her friends, her own family, and even moved country. She had 2 nationalities to study, what she had always dreamed. Sadly, this was not the end of the story. Months after that drastic change in her life, she killed herself jumping into the underground railways of Paris. She just dumped all us so her death didn't affect us. Or I don't know what was she thinking about. I couldn't go to her funeral. I couldn't tell her goodbye. I ended in the psych ward 2 times, so near one from another as I couldn't face what she had done. I had a mourning that lasted years until I could even date someone. You know you can have situationships, but date someone was impossible for me. Then my actual ex laughed at me for being so long without dating without knowing anything from my past. I still remember with so much sorrow to that girl. She was good, really good girl. IDK, if we would have lasted or not, I was at a bad time in my life and she took care of me with so much love. World sometimes is really unfair and sad. Story 10. watching my best friend slowly die. She had neurofibromatosis, which is tumors growing on her nerves rapidly. She had already had surgery, which helped a lot. She was fine for a good year. Then she needed surgery again. This time was different. Though she slowly lost control of her legs, she couldn't walk anymore. And she also started to lose sight on her eyes, which both cases I thought she will be, okay, this too shall pass. I was wrong, so very wrong. She went into the hospital. She was at the point where she couldn't think straight, use her phone, and just wanted to be home. Even being in so much pain, she still managed to make Halloween candy bags for the whole floor. Staff she just wanted to spread love, that all. She was in hospice care, and due to my field of work, I knew her family was in denial. So they didn't tell me anything directly, which I understand, but I knew where this might be leading to. I stayed one night with her. A nurse came in to do a night checkup. The nurse looked at her and she's damn she only 23. I don't understand how you can possibly say that to someone. The hospital decided to let her go home, and 24 after that she had an aneurysm in front of me and her mom after coming home from the hospital, which led to her going back into the hospital only to be connected to a ventilator. 1 week from that, her mom decided to disconnect her. I was on her bedside holding her hand as I watched her whole family scream. Her heart rate becomes slower and slower. Till this day, I can't get her mother's scream out of my head. I miss her so much. She was only 23. Tumors just kept growing. I look at the whole year she was walking. She was okay. How could I have not noticed she was losing her color? Story 11. My maternal aunt passed away suddenly from a brain aneurysm when I was 16-17. My immediate family live in a different country to the rest of my mom's family. And while my mom is so close to her family, 6 siblings, she just never was with this particular sister. I will never forget the moment my mom got the call that her sister had passed. I have never heard a scream like that before, truly guttural, and then her collapsing and crying on the floor and being sick from shock and grief. Holding my mom on the bathroom floor, her curled up in my lap, hearing her cry for her sister and how sorry she was they never made amends, and what she would do for a chance to take her petty behavior back. I just held her and tried to tell her it was okay and calm her down, but she was truly inconsolable. All the while, I was in total shock at having lost my aunt, that despite her issues with my mom, was nothing short of amazing to me whenever we would visit. This was my first real experience with death. Other than this, my grandfather passed away when I was 3, but I have no memories of that. Of course, the wake, the funeral, and everything that accompanied was beyond heartbreaking. My 4 young cousins now suddenly without a mother, my wonderful granny having to bury her youngest child. But seeing my mom, the strongest, fiercest, most wonderful Irish woman, that grief-stricken and just destitute, was devastating. My mom and I also had a really rocky relationship at that time. Typical teenage stuff mixed in with an abusive relationship I was in and acting out because of. But that moment made me realize so much. It broke my heart in 100 different ways. She's never ever gotten over it. I never will either. Story 12. August 2021. My grandmother is dying in hospice from lung cancer and sepsis after her chemo destroyed her kidneys. Long story. Not the doctor's fault. Her final years were soiled by the medications that were keeping the cancer at bay for so many years, until they didn't. A pillar of every community she was in, incredibly kind and loving. Her life was family and service to others. The beta blockers she was on made her short-tempered and nasty to anyone that routinely annoyed her from the mildest offense. I could watch the pain in her eyes any time she realized she was doing it to me, and I think she hid herself from the family for a time because hurting us was too much for her. 5 years prior, in the summer of 2016, my youngest cousin was hit and killed by a car in a crosswalk. It was both his and the driver's fault. I went completely numb for a long time, but I witnessed how hard it hit my grandmother. My cousin adored her and she him. At his funeral, all she could say to me was, "Please be safe, please." It destroyed her more than most of us, especially since after his death, my uncle, divorced, moved back with his parents for support. While going through her own grief, she was supporting my uncle in his. As she was dying and after she died, everything began to come back and a mountain of grief went through me. In my saddest moment, I remember sitting on the floor in the bathroom, face buried in a towel, screaming as loud as I could into the void until it turned into sobbing. I did not begin to actually process this grief until I got help. If you are reading this, please do not wait to seek help in grief. It does not go away on its own and it accrues interest. Story 13. I know most people think it's not as big of a deal to lose a pet as to lose a person. I've lost both and cried plenty all around, but losing my bunny was hands down my saddest moment. I was 8 months pregnant and he had G-stasis. He got it regularly due to his megacolon and I had always helped him pull through. His name was Andrew. He was 6.5 years old and I had him since he was 8 weeks. He was the most beautiful Harlequin Hollandlop. He was my best friend and my baby. This time I couldn't help him. We tried everything. The vets in my city apparently just stopped helping rabbits, including the vet I had frequented for years. I had to drive him to another city 1 hour away, which stressed him out more because he hated car rides. I kept working while he was sick to try to keep my mind off everything and to make up enough hours for my upcoming mat leave. My mother was with him. She called me when it happened. I think I screamed. I just remember everyone rushing over because they thought something was wrong with my pregnancy. My best friend took me to another room so I could calm down. Then I drove home. I had to wait to tell my husband because I didn't want him upset during his 1 hour commute from work. I told him on the front lawn. I felt like a failure. I couldn't keep Andrew alive. How was I going to keep our daughter alive? I immersed myself in work for the rest of my pregnancy, and thankfully the demanding nature of being a new parent helped keep my mind of it. But damn, it was so hard. Story 15. Going visiting my mom in hospice. Ma had stage 4 cancer, and shortly after the diagnosis, the pain got so bad she had to go to hospice. In the beginning, she was just tired and drugged up. We knew she wasn't going to get better. The doctor told us she didn't have long. So every day after work, I would run over, visit until she fell asleep, and then go home. Over time, she got thinner, paler, less and less herself. Lesions were one of the many symptoms to this particular cancer. One had formed on her brain. It ate through that membrane around the brain and parts of the bone. My mom's skull started to collapse a little where it happened. The worst days were either one day where she fell asleep holding my hand, and when she woke up, she didn't recognize me. I know it was the cancer, but the shock and pain was the same. The other was when I had to explain to my brother that he needs to keep it together while in the room. If you're going to break, just step out. Dad was there every day and would come home for a few hours a day to shower, eat, and then go back. It's been 7 years, and it still brings me to tears to think about the month and a half she spent wasting away. I don't wish that on anyone. Story 17. When I said goodbye to my paternal grandmother after a Mother's Day lunch and knew in my gut I would never see her again. She had lung cancer. With treatment, it went into remission for a bit under a year, then came roaring back. Metastasized to brain and liver. She was on hospice care on a lot of pain meds with my grandfather taking care of her. Never smoked a day in her life, but my granddad did. She died a week after the visit. At her funeral, I cried so hard it was like someone was tearing my bones out. I didn't know it was possible for a person to sob as hard as I did. Gran was my mother, more mother to me than my own biological mother was. She loved me with every cell in her body, and I knew it. 25 years and I'll never be over the loss. Grandpa died less than a year later. A stroke felled him, but really he died of a broken heart. He didn't want to live without her. Runners-up are both times I had my old dogs euthanized. I was there with them both until the very last breath, feeling their final heartbeat under my hand. They weren't alone for a second. It was the right thing to do for my beloved companions, and I probably sobbed about as hard as I had for my grandmother. Loss is a bitch. Loss is a... Story 18. My grandma was diagnosed with stage 4 stomach cancer August 16 and passed Jan 17. I was the first to know since I drove her to all her appointments and had to tell my mom the news. I was 19 at the time. Those 6 months were filled with sleepless nights, bits of hope when she'd be her usual self, but ultimately the realization that she would leave us soon. Held her hand when she took her last breath. She was the strongest person I've ever known. An even tougher experience was trying to explain to my deaf grandpa, who was bedridden and had dementia, that my grandma had passed. He stared at her from his wheelchair for a couple minutes until he said he wanted to go back to bed. Throughout the years, he would often call out her name. At first, we'd try to explain that she was no longer with us. He'd just stare blankly and look away. Eventually, we would just tell him that she was in the kitchen cooking or out running errands. He'd nod his head. This continued often until my grandpa passed in John 21. They both grew up dirt poor in El Salvador, came to the U.S., gained citizenship after decades of honest work. They taught me how to be strong but not cold, to always look after your family, and that no matter what happens, keep moving forward. I think about them every day. Story 19. My mother was an alcoholic all my life, high-functioning and a diagnosed narcissist. Finally, when the drinking caught up to her and her liver shut down, she lost her mind too. In the hospital before she was put on hospice, she was so medicated she could not really understand what was going on. One of the last conscious moments she had was with me. She woke up and just started sobbing. She had been out of it, loopy and in and out of consciousness for a few days. Liver failure will do that to a person. But in this moment, she seemed to be present. She was just sobbing and panicking, looking at me and saying, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry," over and over again. She looked so scared. And I was still so mad at her for all she put me through, for dying on me for all of it. All I could do was pet her hair and say, "I know, Mom. I wish I told her it was okay or that I forgave her." But I was so mad. She looked so scared, her eyes so panicked, looking for someone to help her. And I couldn't do anything to help her. I had just turned 16, she just turned 49. She died 3 weeks later in the same hospital she gave birth to me in. Story 20. Happened to me 2 years ago. It was March 26th when I had to leave for a competition in a different city. My father has been drinking a lot, and I didn't see him for quite a while. So, 20 minutes before my team and I were supposed to leave, my mom gets a call from Dad. She listened to what was said and was terrified. She didn't tell me what happened. So I just went to the competition with my team. We had a good time, spent the night in a hotel. The next day was the competition, and I got a gold medal for the first time in my life. We went home. On the way back, I listened to music. Good mood. I came home. Mom tells me to sit and says, "Your father died." I didn't believe it at first, but then I was absolutely terrified and gutted. I cried for 2 hours straight. I couldn't stop. At that time, by the way, I was 14 years old. Life has actually changed me since that happened. I trained, got better, and gained some muscle mass. I also went through another teenage love. I became so much stronger both physically and mentally. Turned out that the call from Dad was police telling my mom that my dad died. Mom didn't tell me about it on purpose until I came back. Story 22. At a convention, a dad and his son waited to play Mario Kart 8. The son got distracted playing another demo. When their turn came, the dad wanted his son to join, but got refused as the son was busy playing Star Fox Zero. The dad tried playing alone with a Nintendo helper, but seemed disheartened. It was clear he just wanted to spend time with his son at the convention. Story 23. Realizing that my sister and I are only going to slowly watch my father die with alcoholism, and realizing that his stepchildren are much more important to him than his bio kids ever were. Meeting up with my former dance instructor at the studio, and her spilling all of her life details to me about how her abusive BF of 1 month stole $6K, trashed her house, and traumatized her children. Her youngest child, 5F, was there, and I have never seen a child look so traumatized and without hope. I only saw pain and anguish. I realized that it wasn't the beef who traumatized this little girl, although I'm sure it didn't help. It's the life her mother is living in that is traumatizing. She got back together with him after that. The second time they broke up, he made new numbers and threatened to kill her, or that she should kill herself before he gets to it. This woman has 7 kids, kids who will be neglected and unable to know what is good for the rest of their lives. Unable to depend on anyone who is dependable. Currently, she is posting all about how much they love each other on FB. He now lives with her and her 5 youngest children. Story 26. In early January, my wife and I still are, raising a baby 5,000 kilometers away from any family. And that's hard. We were fighting a lot, and I was feeling lonely and really depressed just from that. Then my mom got breast cancer and I couldn't go home. If something happened to her, my dad is disabled in constant pain and he couldn't live on his own. And I couldn't help because my elderly dog and best friend started getting debilitating seizures where she was out of it for 2 weeks after pooping and peeing everywhere in the house. I had to stay with her. And work wasn't going well. It was just too much. I cried almost every day, was losing my temper, and started getting debilitating fatigue. Like a car stalling on a highway, my brain would just start shutting down mid-activity. Thankfully, Mom's surgery went well, as did her chemo, which she is recovering from now. My dog has recovered. She's happy and energetic again. Not bad for a 16-year-old girl. We are ready to say goodbye when it's time now. I've started antidepressants, and after some communication with my wife over how we were both struggling, we are all doing better now. Story 27. My mother emotionally and verbally abused me when I was a kid, and rarely ever showed empathy or compassion towards anyone besides animals. When I was 10, we had a cat. She loved him. I mean, we all did. But she was showering that cat with more love than I have seen her give to anyone or anything before. One day, per usual, she treated me like crap, yelled at me, called me names, etc. And right after she did that, she went to the cat, absolutely showered him with affection, and I remember thinking to myself, my mom loves our cat more than she loves me. I was devastated, but thankfully, the feeling didn't last long. When I was a kid, I was able to regulate, or in retrospect, ignore, my emotions pretty well, so I did just that. I stopped caring about what she felt or didn't feel for me, and I stopped caring about her. I am nearly 24 now. Don't care much for the woman, don't even refer to her as my mom. Haven't since I was 11. Only when I first mention her to someone before they know her name. Story 28. In 2017, my grandmother died at 78. She was in a lot of pain fighting diabetes, bipolar II, severe depression, and she was on dialysis. My big brother told me the day of her funeral that he felt like he would die soon too, and he was quitting smoking, drinking to prepare for the next life. He died a month later in a car accident. He accidentally drove off of a cliff and wasn't found until 3 days later when someone found birds eating his skin. He was only 23. Aside from that, I'd say, having an abortion was the most painful and worst decision I've ever made. I cry all the time, knowing I could have made it work and kept that baby with me. I ended up getting pregnant again 6 months later and having a beautiful baby boy. But I will regret that decision for the rest of my life, and I know there's nothing I can do to change it. If anyone's reading this and thinking about having an abortion, my advice is don't do it. No matter what excuse you give yourself, nothing is worth killing your own child, believe me. Story 29. My father died out of cancer at home. Both my sister and I were with him when he went. Of course, that was sad, but the worst part was unexpected and came later. See, my dad had just not been comfortable in clothes as he was dying. Too hot, itchy, constrictive. IDK sensory issues run in the family. So he went out wearing what he wore on the way in. Don't worry, he was covered by a sheet and blankets. Anyway, we called the hospice people after he went, as we had been told. The nurse showed up and said the funeral home workers were on the way to pick up his body. I asked if I should get out clothes for them to put on him. She looked uncomfortable and said, "They don't do that. They'll just load up his poor, wasted, naked body." I was appalled. So after having my father die in my arms, I had to dress his body by myself to give him some small amount of dignity in death. It was physically very hard. Bodies are heavy when they can't help you move. But emotionally, it wrecked me. Story 30. When my 7-year-old niece left our family to live with her dad, who was a stranger to her. Her mom, my sister, couldn't care for her due to schizophrenia, when my dad teared up because his brother ended his own life by administering his own analgesic veterinary medicine to himself. When I found out that my mom was cheating on my dad, I always confronted her, and one time when I yelled at her, I realized that he probably heard through the walls because I was screaming so loud. I didn't realize he was home. We never talked about it. Sitting with my mom visiting her mom's grave, listening to my mom talking to her saying, "Wish you were here, Ma." My dad's death, which was a very complicated traumatic event. Finding out that I was exposed to an intimatable predator when I was young. I work in social services. Seeing people high on drugs nodding out during important meetings to address their life goals. Seeing people on the street who aren't with it or ain't okay being in public, but everyone just walks right by as if they're simply invisible. Story 31. It was my childhood and my teenage years. I developed depression from childhood due to neglectful parents who had high expectations from me. I used to get hit, always stuck at home, or working at my parents' business. I was in the back, peeling potatoes or washing dishes. I had my hands and nails cut so many times from peeling potatoes or dipping my hands on broken dishes or cups. When I was older, around 14-ish, I was the cashier. I spent all my free time either thrown to tutors or helping my family business. I never developed well to become a well-rounded adult, so I suffered a lot in university and at work due to a lack of coping skills, developing relationships, and emotional stability. But I still became someone I am starting to be proud of. Still not where I want myself to be, but I know I am in a better place. I don't want misery to define my life because misery breeds more. Misery. I believe I deserve more, so I will live well. I will do anything to live a life I am proud about. Story 32. Happened the other day. A mom was visiting her daughter in residential eating disorder treatment. I went to let them know that visiting was up. They were laying on a bed, holding each other, the mom kissing her daughter on the head and telling her how much she loves her while the kid sobbed. I've seen lots of sad, tragic crap in my life, but this one broke my heart. Story 34. I have a friend, they were my best friend for a bit, but time pulls people apart in junior year high school. He was going around asking for just some various equipment later that night. He had said he wasn't feeling good and cut off all contact from both me and other people, except one other friend. We talked and found out that he was planning to kill himself in the school bathroom. It's a Texan school, and he's trans-mask, so nobody besides some nosy kids would see before it was too late. His then parents were awful, and only egged on his bad thoughts eventually. I had to make the call to get some people to send him to the mental hospital. I hadn't gotten to see him for 2 or so months, and couldn't tell if he was okay or not. I felt so hollow, like I had made the choice between execution or torture. But on the bright side, he's doing so much better now. He's fully reveling in life's joys, and I could not be prouder. Story 36. Being bullied into going to prom by my abusive mother, I had no friends, was essentially an outcast, and so got ignored the whole time I was there when I tried to socialize. I did not want to attend, but my mother has always been my biggest bully since I was born. Cherry on top was having to get the bus home in full dress outfit that she picked, and heels I couldn't walk in, alone because she conveniently forgot to pick me up, and I had no friends to do anything with afterwards like most other people. I sobbed the whole way home on the bus. When my mother got home from wherever she was, I got lectured on how I was lucky to have such a great mother like her, and if only I was popular and beautiful, then I would have had a good time. This was all my fault, of course. I'm still an ugly failure with no friends, but at least I don't talk to my mother anymore. Story 37. Lived with my grandparents while working and going to college. I had what I thought was a good group of friends and was on great terms with my coworkers. I had to work on the day I turned 21, but had the following day off. While at work, not a single happy birthday. One of my coworkers had her car break down while her husband was picking her up, so I stayed to try to help fix it and then ultimately drove them home. Got a thanks, but no birthday wishes. No texts or phone calls from friends. No one offered to take me out. Parents didn't call. Even my grandparents forgot it was my birthday. I bought my own cake from a grocery store, went to my room, and ate half of it alone. Went to bed at 8 p.m. alone on my 21st birthday, with no one noticing. I still don't like to celebrate it. My wife always remembers, but I just want to have a nice dinner with her and then move on. Story 38. I've had 3 so far. 1, 2008. When the police turned up on a Friday evening to say my 25-year-old uncle has been reported missing. 48 hours later, they said that they found his body at the bottom of the river. We didn't know how to tell my gran, so we watched her pray and hope until her brother burst out with the truth. 2, 2015. When my granddad passed away and I stood by the same window he stood at when my uncle passed away, he looked out the window, eyes full of tears, saying, "My son will never come home." So I stood in that same spot and cried for him. 3, 2022. When my in-laws went on a family trip abroad, we stayed behind and we got a call the day before, their return to say my husband's 19-month-old nephew who went on his first holiday passed away in his sleep, and they will be coming back the next day without him. Story 39. When I was 24, a very close childhood friend died suddenly in a pointless accident. I don't know if it was his mistake that caused it or just a freak thing. It was my introduction to death as an adult, which hits different than it does as a kid. It obviously ducked up his family too, and I'm not sure if they'll ever recover. I had made it to that point in my life with a feeling of, hey, things will always work out if you try hard and are a good person. Nope, complete bullcrap. A completely pointless accident took my best friend and left me with a feeling that there's no plan. It's all chaos, and very few people give a crap about any of us. 13 years later, and nothing is any better. And things continue to not work out despite trying hard and trying to be a good person. Tell the people you love that you love them. Right now. Go do it. Story 41. My son was 3 months old. I couldn't stop buying $300, $400 worth of heroin a day. The love I experience from him is the greatest emotion I have ever experienced, and it wasn't enough to get my clean. I'm 3 years clean. He is turning 4 on July 1st. I have him more than 50%. His love is what finally made me put the work and effort in to be a positive role model for him and be active in his life. Story 43. My dad's best friend died of a heart attack about 10 years ago. They'd been close since high school. When we went to the funeral, I was surprised that I seemed more broken up about it than my dad was. A little while ago, I looked up that friend who had passed on Facebook just to find a photo of him that I remembered. His entire page was just my dad over the last 10 years posting notes to him about how he missed him. Birthdays, holidays, sports games, random days. Just the little moments when my dad would think of him and would leave a quick note, a sort of digital prayer. Happy little notes that always ended with how he missed him. I absolutely broke down reading it. I've lost friends and family over the years, but something about seeing the way my dad had been quietly carrying his grief for a decade hit me harder than any of them. Story 44. I had a lot of sad experiences with my biological mother, but I think the worst of all those experiences was when I was in a severe depression with self-H forming, and she told me to K1L myself instead doing that. Not because she couldn't handle the situation. It was because she thought all her life that I was pretending to be feeling bad. I already had my diagnosis of depression, anxiety, and social anxiety. I want to add that, due to my memory problems, I am not sure if the following happened or is a transformation of reality, but I think I remember how that time she threw objects at my face to K-well me, while she yelled at me to finally do it. But as I said, I'm not sure because my memory problems. I'm doing better though, don't worry. 3. Edit. I was a minor at that time. I was like 12 or 13, yo. Story 45. My dad's death, which is 10 years ago next month. Sudden call at work that I needed to come to the assisted living place we had just moved my parents into 6 days previously. When I got there, they told me he was dead. Coroner was getting ready to remove the body. My mom, who was suffering from dementia, was utterly destroyed. I became destroyed having to take care of my mom and deal with my father's death. The nurse for the facility told me it was actually pretty common that people would have traumatic medical events following moving into a new place. This information after the ordeal that was trying to get them to move because they couldn't take care of their house anymore just did me in. I took it as my fault and hated myself for making them move. It took 6 years and a whole lot of therapy to get over that. Thank you all for watching. Watch even more great stories on my channel.